freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free.
Welcome back, everyone, to Patriot Coalition Live. I'm Matthew Nugent.
And I'm Jason Morochek.
Thanks for joining us today, everyone. Our goal is to create a timeless resource to teach about the U.S. Constitution and the proper role of government, the importance of America's Judeo-Christian heritage, and how to defend against threats to our republic. Folks, we have an email address. We would love to hear from you. The email address is freedom@Patriot Coalition Live. That's freedom@Patriot Coalition Live. We'd love to hear from you. Our sponsor this week is conservativeeconomy.com. That's conservativeeconomy.com, which is the free speech alternative to Amazon. Why spend your time, attention, and dollars at Amazon, which censors, blocks, and seeks to destroy the livelihoods of conservatives, when you can shop at the free speech alternative, conservativeeconomy.com? For those of you who didn't know, on episode 25, Jason and I officially launched conservativeeconomy.com. Jason and I, who are both Army veterans, created Conservative Economy because companies like Amazon, Google, Facebook, Squarespace, and Twitter, the Axis powers, have become too powerful and have abused their power and success. We created Conservative Economy to fight against what we call the three-headed beast of mainstream media, big tech, and big business, and to give you, every freedom-loving American, a way to get in the fight at the grassroots level in bringing America back to its founding principles and values. At conservativeeconomy.com, we have great products you know and love, like MyPillow, and with the discount code FREEMARKET, that's FREEMARKET, one word, you get a 10% discount and you help us out. We also have awesome tech products, clothing for your family, skincare products, athletic gear, cool survival gear, and so much more.
Yeah, we've got some great stuff on there, gang. In fact, I just ordered some body armor for myself and a cell phone charger and a cable for my wife. Now, it remains to be seen, but I think I got the better end of that deal.
I know Jason and his wife are wonderful people. I just imagine Jason walking around the store with some body armor on, and his wife, I got my cell phone charged. Isn't that cool? And I mean, Jason is a warrior, and I'm presuming. I mean, you said the body armor is for you, so I presume correctly. Now, so we have a lot of different stuff, people. Yeah. So remember, every dollar you spend at conservativeeconomy.com is $1 less that companies like Amazon can use to destroy America, and is one more dollar that supports freedom-loving businesses like MyPillow. Thank you for doing your part, because we empower liberty. Not just us, but you. We empower liberty. Thanks for doing your part in bringing America back to its founding principles and values by shopping at shopping at conservativeeconomy.com. Okay, y'all ready to get in this episode?
Yes.
Let's do it. Okay, title of today's episode is Article 1, Section 6, Congressional Pay and Privileges. As a review, Article 1 is about the Congress. Article 1, Section 1 is about what the legislature is comprised of, which is a bicameral Congress, and that the Constitution gives all lawmaking authority to Congress.
How much of that do they get?
It's not part, but all.
All of it. Oh, good. Okay. So how much does that leave for everyone else?
0.
Okay, just checking. I want to make sure my math skills are still good.
Good math skills. Okay. Article 1, Section 2 is about the House. Section 3 is about the Senate. Section 4 deals with the times, places, and manner of congressional elections. Section 5 addresses how Congress may conduct business in their respective chambers. And today we're talking in Article 1, Section 6 about
congressional pay and privileges.
There we go. Okay, so here we go. We're going to start reading now. Quote, the senators and representatives shall receive a compensation for their services to be ascertained by law and paid out of the Treasury of the United States. Okay. Unquote. This clause is pretty straightforward. It's an important task. Being in Congress is a difficult, important task. At least what they're supposed to do is extremely important. They have a low rating, and for good reason. They're looked at poorly because of a good reason. Interesting. And we should pay them for
today
it.
They are, right? But back then they had high hopes, and for a while they were. I mean, they were the best and the brightest. So we have to remember that. It's a little bit different context today.
There's a lot to talk about that we can unpack in another episode, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
So the debate around this clause was who should pay the salaries. Either the states should pay the salaries, or the national government, the U.S. Treasury, should pay the salary. Why is who pays important? Because whoever pays has the power and influence, or at least a lot of power and influence over whomever is getting paid. Now, at the Constitutional Convention, Colonel George Mason was one of the attendees, and this is what he said about it. Quote, the parsimony of the states, meaning the poverty, might reduce the provision so low that, as had already happened in choosing delegates to Congress, the question would be not were most fit to be chosen, but who were most willing to serve, unquote. What he's saying is some states have been so poor that they couldn't afford to pay their representatives, and so they didn't even show up. And what happened was you didn't get the most talented. You would get something, someone to the effect of, okay, so no one else is willing to do it. I'll do it. I'm not really good at it, but I can do it. So it had already happened. It was an issue, and let's say if the pay was low and there were 100 highly qualified candidates, but only 25 had enough income so they could do it, but you'd be missing out on 75 great candidates. Okay, so that said, this is an important topic.
Yeah, no, you nailed it. I mean, there's the pool of great candidates, and as soon as you start to give the authority for the states to figure out what they want to pay them, not only will the scales be different for different states, but you reduce the pool of candidates to those who can do it because they're already wealthy, right? You exclude those who may have the right virtue but don't have the means to do that. So it was really important that they figured out who paid them.
There you go. So well said. The virtue and the means. So if the pay is consistent across board, they can just focus on the virtue, which is more important than the means if it's an even playing field as far as the pay. Also at the Constitutional Convention, Mr. Pierce Butler from South Carolina advocated for the states to pay senators and salaries. And the notes from the Constitutional Convention say, quote, Mr. Butler contended for payment by the states, particularly in the case of the Senate, who will be so long out of their respective states, because it's obviously 6 years, that they will lose sight of their constituents unless dependent upon them for their support, unquote. This is a good argument because the senators represent his own states, so that state should support him. However, if the senator votes on legislation the state doesn't like, okay, that state could decide not to pay that senator. If this were the case, I would not want to be a senator because my family's livelihood depends on the whims of a state legislature. We don't like you, which these, legislatures and bodies can be fickle and unpredictable.
Yeah, no, and as I mentioned, I mean, if everyone's salary is determined by their own state, then you could have some that are paid a lot more than others. It kind of creates different classes of senators or representatives.
And could you imagine? Yeah. I mean, Massachusetts was the wealthiest. Could you imagine? I'm a South Carolina senator, and they would get paid almost nothing versus I'm a Massachusetts senator, and it would create different classes. Would have created different classes of senators.
Yeah, and consider this too, right? So senators at that time, right? You're a horse and buggy away, a week-long journey possibly from South Carolina or wherever from New York. I don't know, maybe it was longer than that. I don't know, but a long way away, right? So those senators for 6 years would be away from home sometimes. They might go back, maybe once a year, but they have to do that for 6 years. So imagine if they were paid because their states can afford it less than a representative who only have to do that for 2 years, right? The level of hardship is different. And so there's really not any equity if you leave it up to the states. They could be completely out of whack.
There you go. So ultimately, those in favor of paying members of Congress out of the U.S. Treasury won the day. It was a good decision.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, and plus, remember, we discussed previously that the framers, they were very, very cautious about giving the states any sort of authority that they could use to either sabotage or maybe hold hostage the federal republic, right? If they lower the payment to zero or, just very, very small, they wouldn't send any representatives. And pretty soon, if a number of states did that or they couldn't pay them, then the republic falls apart. So it's extremely important.
There you go.
So let's talk about the next clause of Article 1, Section 6, and that is, quote, they shall, meaning the members of Congress, they shall in all cases except treason, felony, and breach of the peace be privileged from arrest during their attendance at the session of their respective houses and in going to and returning from the same.
This is interesting. So basically, a congressman can get away with being a major scofflaw, park wherever they want, get away with all kinds of minor infractions, and not get arrested if they're in session or on the way to session.
No, that's very true. Obviously within these parameters, as long as they're not, committing a felony, being treasonous or, a breach of the peace, that's very true, right? And, this is, again, as you said, if they're on their way to the session, flying or traveling, they are privileged from arrest. They cannot be arrested. Because if you think about it, imagine how the legislative process could be usurped if some state troopers or metropolitan police out of let's say California or Washington D.C., because their governor or their mayor tells them to go and be on the lookout for these representatives and arrest them on whatever pretense is necessary. Imagine if they got enough of those members of Congress arrested so that they couldn't attend their session and vote on a very important bill that either that mayor or that governor disagrees with, right? You could start to see these politicians, not the politicians, you can start to see these other entities who have a vested interest in how these votes turn out, start to say, you know what, I think it's best if this representative who's opposing my viewpoint on this bill doesn't make it to Congress today, right? So it's really, really kind of some shady circumstances.
So that is true, and it's interesting. So, man, I tell you what I think is particularly interesting about this clause is that our founding fathers knew the heart of man so much, obviously from previous experiences with England, and they knew the heart of man so much and what chicanery and unscrupulous a man would be to get what he wants or a group would want to get the way they want.
No, that's true. And they also recognized, the framers that is, the dangers of granting privileges to lawmakers to an unreasonable extent because of the experience that they had with the British Parliament. As a result, they put very strict limits on the privileges that those members of Congress had here in America.
What is arresting to me about this topic is that from before the founding of our great nation, tyranny loomed. And today, tyranny looms broadly in our country, both politically and throughout corporations with their own political agenda. It begs the question, what would prevent, someone like you or I, Jason, from becoming tyrants if we were elected to Congress? For example, what would stop a cabal, meaning a group aimed to do bad in Congress, from authoring legislation that they know would violate our constitutionally guaranteed rights? For example, restricting access to firearms, ammunition, or firearms accessories.
No, it's a great point. So, we've talked about this before, and we'll talk about it ad nauseum probably. That the most important thing that we, the people, temporarily loan to our government is the ability to make laws. Now, those laws can be made for good or for evil purposes, right? They are the laws, right? As long as it's within the framework of the Constitution, they can make it whatever they want to. So to answer your question, what would stop somebody? I mean, it's really, in my mind, it's two things, right? First is knowing what is right and wrong, having that knowledge of knowing what is right and wrong. And that requires, understanding what's in the Constitution, but also understanding from our Judeo-Christian our heritage, what is the right thing to do and what's the wrong thing to do. And the second is, once you know what is right or wrong, doing what is right, even when it's inconvenient or unpopular. And of course, you know my favorite motto: principles only mean something if you stick to them when it's inconvenient, right? So it's not just because if you only stick to them when it's convenient, then they're just preferences, they're not principles.
There you go. So you speak to competence and character, meaning competence, knowing what's right in the character, um, to do the right thing. How many people today hesitate from doing the right thing because they fear peer pressure?
Yeah.
For example, if there's a mass shooting, which it's just there's so many people in the United States, it's going to happen. If there's a mass shooting, a congressman might choose the easier wrong rather than the harder right and relent and give in to mainstream media pressure. And they'll author a bill to restrict access to guns, ammunition, and gun accessories. In fact, if you guys are not watching, I've actually got a picture up here of the cadet prayer from West Point. And what I just mentioned there was an allusion to that, the cadet prayer to choose the harder right over the easier wrong. And it is not easy. It is not easy. And that's why character is so important in our leaders.
Yeah, I was just going to point that out. It's like I noticed you made a reference to the cadet prayer. That's nice that you slipped that in there. Yeah, the legislative authority, again, is the most important one that we the people loan to our government. And so because of that, on one hand, we have to, we basically got to balance two things. We've got to make sure that the that ability is protected in the most effective way possible. And that means we've got to give some privilege to the members of Congress to make sure that they can deliberate freely and debate freely and speak their mind and their conscience. On the other hand, we have to make sure that we don't extend those privileges so far that they can abuse them and just basically create carve-outs and, well, they already do that. But what I mean is to create carve-out like positions of wealth and influences for them and their family, which is exactly what happened in the British Parliament. And so the framers at this point were we were really close to when, they had just left, Great Britain. So they knew about all these things. It was fresh in their mind. And so those are the things that they had to try to balance. And I think they struck a very good balance.
It's interesting that you talk about in Great Britain and the abuse of powers. Right about the time of our, War of Independence, something similar was going on in France, where the king, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, they had thousands of courtiers, and in fact, the king, despite all this, wanted to do some good, and the king Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette made an agreement that only 80 people are needed to take care of their 1-month-old child. And what happened is there was so much corruption. The monarchy and their courtiers were paid lavish salaries. They were not paid taxes, and the people were destitute and paid for this opulence and this wealth, right, which is yet another example of abuse of privileges.
Yeah, and so that's what we're going to get into here a little bit is other ways that we can, or that the Constitution limits that. But the next clause begins that they shall in all cases be privileged for, again, we're talking about the members of Congress. They shall in all cases be privileged for any speech or debate in either house. They shall not be questioned in any other place. So let's say, for example, your senator voted for a gun control law, and then suddenly your senator, Matt, in Florida, they're in Florida. You guys are almost as nutty about guns as we are, right?
Getting
there. And so let's say the state legislature in Florida summons him back and says, we're going to grill him in a public hearing about what he voted on or debated about in Congress. This accomplished a couple of things. One, it would instill fear in that senator that, oh gosh, if I continue to do this, I'm going to continue to be put on the hot seat. And the second is potentially intimidate that member of Congress to bend to the will of the state legislature, right? So if we expose these members of Congress to any sort of scrutiny in terms of like public hearings and so forth, it's an extra layer that they're not beholden, at least anymore, to those state legislatures or to, let's say, a court of law. right, for what they say. They ought to be beholden
Mhm.
only to the people. So he needs to be able to, that member of Congress needs to be able to deliberate and debate with his colleagues freely without any threat of being called into an official hearing or a court hearing, or et cetera.
Yeah, it's interesting. Part of this that we're seeing here is wisdom. Part of it is just experience on the part of our founding fathers and the framers of the Constitution,
And those
because
two things go together. Yeah.
I mean, they experienced it under the tyranny of King George.
Right.
So we are blessed by their experience and their wisdom. So moving forward, next sentence, quote, no senator or representative shall, during the time for which he was elected, be appointed to any civil office under the authority of the United States, which shall have been created, or the emoluments, meaning payments, whereof shall have been increased during such time, unquote. Okay, what this is saying, this is an interesting one. This is saying an elected official cannot work in a government job that was created by Congress during his terms. Okay, so you might hear about Congress, raising their pay. It's always for the next session of Congress, because they can't do it for that current session of Congress. Okay.
Right.
And he cannot work in a government job for which the salary was increased during his term. So,
Yeah, so
that,
I'll just
yeah,
throw out
please.
like an example. So imagine, so these two things are kind of what this clause is about. One is, while if I'm let's say a senator in Congress and I vote for a new position called, we were joking about before, the Supreme Allied Commander of the Universe, right? And it has a very nice salary. If that position is created during my session of Congress, my term of Congress, I can't, as a senator, go and fill that position, right? That's the first thing. And the second thing, if that position already exists and my Congress, the Congress that I'm in my term, decides to increase or double the salary for the Supreme Allied Commander of the Universe, I can't then resign and go take that position, right? So it all revolves around what I'm doing. If I'm in Congress at any specific time, I can't create a position and I can't increase the salary of a position and then go take that position.
There you go. It's one check to reduce the chance of corruption occurring.
That's
It
right.
still does. There
Yeah.
still does. There aren't enough good laws that'll stop bad people.
That's a great phrase. Yep.
And I'm sure someone said that before me, but if you want to quote me, it's fine. James Wilson at the Constitutional Convention, this is from James Madison's notes. James Wilson, quote, suggested also the fatal consequence in time of war of rendering perhaps the best commanders ineligible, appealing to our situation during the late war, and indirectly leading to a recollection of the appointments of the commander-in-chief out of Congress. What that means is George Washington could not have been general because he served in the Continental Congress before the start of the War of Independence. So, sometimes the Constitution has to be amended, but there's definitely the founders wanted to prevent corruption. For example,
I was just going to say, so in this phrase, when they were talking about this originally in the Constitutional Convention, they were talking about they can't, no member of Congress can take any position that is in the federal government for they started debating, was it 1 year, 2 years, 3 years after their term is up. And so that's when this section came about. And they're like, hey, if we did that, George Washington couldn't have been pulled from the Continental Congress and put as the commander-in-chief of our forces. So we have to be careful that we're not too restrictive in determining what we put in this Constitution.
There you go. So the founders also wanted to prevent corruption. For example, Congress voting themselves a raise every year while they were in office, or creating $500,000 a year jobs for every congressman who leaves office. So, it is just one way to check corruption. So, and they wanted balance with the need of establishing a new government. So they needed a new government, and they needed some boundaries there. Charles Pink, this is from Madison's note at the Constitutional Convention, quote, Mr. Pinckney, said, the first legislature will be composed of the ablest men to be found. The states will select such to put the government into operation. Should the report of the committee or even the amendment be agreed to, the great offices, even those of the Judiciary Department, which are continue for life, to continue for life must be filled whilst those most capable of filling them will be under a disqualification, unquote.
Yeah, this was Charles Pinckney's attempt to kind of put what they were doing in context, right? Remember, the government hadn't been formed yet, so there weren't already existing congressmen and a Supreme Court and a president. So this was to be determined, right? And so in Pinckney's idea, the first thing, as we keep mentioning, the first thing that they needed to do was fill that Congress. That's the most important duty of a civil society that we grant our government. So the most able people are going to be put into positions in Congress. Okay, so now that the best people are in Congress, oh, wait a minute, now we still have to fill other positions like the president's cabinet and the Supreme Court of the United States. If we've already taken all the best people for those jobs in Congress, then we're going to have to go and find not the second best people for some of those jobs, right? And so his point is, look, we still have work to do after we fill the Congress, so we can't make it so restrictive that we aren't going to be able to put the best people in the best positions.
So it was a balance. It was definitely a balance, and I think they did an amazing job.
Yeah, they did.
And the more we study and Jason actually he reads the founding documents and the founding notes, and it's incredible. All of these things that come open to us. So, in the last sentence of this clause, quote, "And no person holding any office under the United States shall be a member of either house during his continuance in office." So, unquote. So this is the same, but in reverse. For example, they cannot be a member of Congress, excuse me, and a special advisor to the President of the United States, because that goes against the separation of powers. Working for the president and the Congress at the same time is a conflict of interest. Now, that's just one example, but that's what it was for.
Yeah. So let's kind of wrap up this Article 1, Section 6. So there's three main pieces of this. It talks about compensation for the members of Congress. It talks about the privileges that they have, and also to eliminate any sort of corruption, right? So in terms of compensation, the big question was who pays? Is it the central government or is it the states? And we talked about, the different pros and cons of doing it both way. Ultimately, those who were in favor of the national government paying one out, and I think that was the right choice. Second, the privileges, right? The members of Congress, again, are privileged from arrest, going to and from their sessions of Congress, and also while they're in Congress. This makes complete sense because you don't want to have a partisan group try to arrest somebody who's going to oppose something that they are promoting. And they're also privileged in their speech. They can't be held accountable by a court of law or some state legislature or any sort of court for the debates they have in Congress, the speech they have. They have to be able to deliberate, freely with, whatever is in their conscience. And finally, the corruption. In order to prevent, the climbing of the government ladder and creating carve-outs for their influencers, their family, et cetera, as much as possible, the framers set out a structure that, look, if I'm serving in Congress right now and I'm voting on, it's a conflict of interest to vote on a new position and then resign and then go fill that position, especially when I get to determine how much they're paid. Or if it's already existing, I can't vote to increase that pay and then say, oh, that sounds good, I'm going to go there, right? So just sort of some, as we see it now, common sense things that they had to create from the beginning, right? They had to have the vision to understand what they were going to face. And to Matt's point, they depended heavily on their experience and wisdom from previous tyrants that they were subject to. So that wraps up this episode, and hopefully you've learned a little bit more about what Congress can and can't do, what their pay can and can't do, and who pays for it. So we'll look forward to seeing you guys next time.
Awesome. Great work today, Jason. What's interesting is that it's not a very famous, Article 1 and Section 6. I mean, who would have thought? But every time we uncover this, go through different layers, we uncover more wisdom of our founding fathers. So great work today. Folks, remember that wherever you spend your time, attention, and dollars, you empower. If you spend your dollars with Amazon, you empower Amazon to cancel, censor, and destroy the lives of people with conservative principles, which they clearly have done.
Yeah.
Every freedom-loving family needs a place to shop that supports their principles and values. Let conservative economy be yours. That's conservativeeconomy.com. Remember, we empower liberty, not just us, not just you, but we
We the
empower
people.
liberty. There you go. If you are not already a regular subscriber, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts at places like iHeartRadio or Spotify. If you haven't already done so, please give us a 5-star rating. It really does help and helps people to find this podcast. Okay. So thanks everyone so much. We'll see you here next time.
Take care, gang.